Welcome to the latest in an ongoing series from the California Library Association under the auspices of the Ursula Meyer Advocacy Fund Training Series. And if that isn't a mouthful, I don't know what is. If you're watching the recorded version, you are now seeing a slide that explains what the program is about. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds of silence so you can read, absorb, and prepare for the midterm by looking at everything there. Note that we do have the series recorded and episodes posted free of charge and easily accessible on YouTube through the CLA channel. I'm going to stop talking. You are not losing sound. It's about the only 30 seconds of silence you'll have in the next 90 minutes. And there we go. That was the way I wanted to do that, not the way I just did it. It took me that long to realize you were still seeing the images at the top. So there's the slide, about another 15 seconds worth. All right, so that is who we are and what we are. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and go back to our panel. There are three main panelists today, Joyce, Beth, and Shawn. And without further ado, I'm going to give it to Joyce so she can jump into a story and get this show running. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, where I'm sitting outside of Chicago, Illinois. So yes, I'm here today because I'm a librarian and our lives are crazy right now. Equally important, I'm here because as a librarian, I'm required to uphold the First Amendment, access to information for our patrons. And by all patrons, I mean whether you're in a town of 2,000 people, whether you're in a town of 2 million people, if you're 2 years old, or if you're 92 years old. We need to provide access to information and adhere to those First Amendment principles for all. I'm also here because I'm a parent. I have got a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they're like this, far reaches of a spectrum. My 12-year-old has been reading since he was 3, and my 9-year-old is learning how to read right now and wrote his first full sentence this fall. Now, I bring that up because if my 12-year-old can't access books because someone decided that his middle school library, the topic's too mature, the book's too complicated, and they moved it to, say, a high school or a public library, then he's not finding the information he needs. Or if someone decides that books by Roby Harris, like It's Not the Stork or It's Perfectly Normal, don't belong in a children's department, my 9-year-old who learns by looking at images won't have access to materials that would help him with sex ed. Also, both my sons are biracial and have queer family members. So if you start removing books related or by authors who are people of color or that have LGBTQ content, you're removing their ability to see themselves and their family history. So I'm here because with all the challenges, I think from those perspectives every day. I'm going to start off not by showing my slides right away, but by asking you to share one challenge your library has faced and how you resolved it. If you're able to just either type in the chat a quick synopsis or share with us by unmuting and talking. I'm interested in what your experiences have been.
I can go if nobody else wants to.
Great, go ahead, Veronica.
So I don't think we've received a challenge yet, but we've been in I would say like a sticky situation. We had I was leading a book discussion for the 1619 project, and we do live in a very conservative area, and my director was receiving some type of information that they were planning to have a protest outside of our library with poor because we were actually just, I don't even say a showcasing. We were just, hosting a discussion about two different topics, and anybody was really welcome for it. We had a meeting, we moved forward with the discussion, and we didn't have any protests, but we were pretty, prepared if something happened. And yeah, and so that's one of them that we've had. And then we've also, I do have a patron that comes in, and she kind of has a lot of concerns about some of the books that we have, and has requested, although she doesn't know specifically which books they are, she has requested that I take them from the shelf for her and kind of show her which books she should protest against. Which, I kind of was really vague about it. And I was like, we do have a lot of variety of different books. If there's anything specific that you'd like me to get from the shelf, I would love to pull it out for you. But I'm not sure which ones you're referring to, because she was saying that it was children's pornography, basically, that she wanted to look at. So since then, she's actually come back, and she has requested a couple different books. She's become more informed, and so she's requested a couple of different books, and so yeah, she's used them primarily at the schools. I think she goes to some of our school board meetings, but nothing at the public library. But I am prepared with our policy, so that is one thing. So those are the two situations that I've been encountering the last probably year and a half or so.
Thank you for sharing those. And that was a perfect introduction to give us a sample of what's going on. And just so you know, if you didn't have a chance to speak now, I'm going to ask a few scenarios in my presentation here. And then I'm also we're going to have a number of talking times. So please hold on to your thought or type it into the chat. Paul, is this an okay time to start the presentation?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. And like I said, I'm going to have a couple of scenarios through this process, but I wanted to share a few initial thoughts with you. And as a side note, my colleague Teresa Chamara is going to be speaking next month about YA issues, and she is an attorney, general counsel for the Freedom to Read Foundation, so she'll be focused more on the law. So I like to think about having knowledge of what's taking place, having awareness of my library's policies and what the process is, so I'm prepared, like Veronica just shared regarding preparation, and then how I can be an advocate or how I can help other people become advocates for our libraries. You are all most likely aware that we've moved from challenges 1.0 to what I'll call 3.0. 1.0 was when we'd have one parent, like the one patron she just mentioned, coming in and saying, I don't like this, and we'd have a conversation and move on from there. Challenges 2.0 is where we're seeing organized groups coming in with lists of 10, 20, or 100 books, and they're trying to circumvent policies or go outside of the library to like county government or others. And then finally, challenges 3.0, we're starting to see censorship in legislation. And to give you the sort of graphic of this, couple weeks ago, ALA shared what we're already seeing in 2023. And in the first 8 months of 2023, we've already seen a 20% increase in challenges throughout the country. To share a note about intellectual freedom, so we're on the same page and I'm not just tossing that definition out. I view intellectual freedom as the right of unrestricted access to information and ideas as protected by the First Amendment. And what I like to note when I have parents or others say, well, this doesn't belong here, or would you want your child reading that? I step back and think about the fact that as a librarian, I don't need to know why a person wants access to a title. They may be doing research. They may have a medical condition. It's truly not for me to determine why they want it. We just provide access to that information. Speaking of access to information, I'm going to give you about a minute to read through this scenario, and then I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about how you would handle this if it took place at your library. Again, feel free to share a response in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and share your ideas. Anyone who would like, feel free to go ahead. Okay, one person said they wouldn't change the location as they also have families who have two mommies. Yes. Yeah. Some other thoughts?
Am I on mute? No. Okay. I feel like if you were to remove them and put them into a different section, that's almost like othering people who already are part of not part of the majority. So that would be my recommendation.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate the next comment that also said I would take time to educate Amy about intellectual freedom. This is a perfect opportunity to educate someone who's working with us at the library on these values and maybe considering some onboarding documents that help people understand this when they begin working in the library. All right, I'm going to keep going here. Oops, one moment. Okay. Related to this question, the group First Books conducted a study, the Diverse Classroom Books Impact Study, and what they've found, they've just begun releasing this data, and I love it. They found that increasing access to diverse books in the classroom environment increases the amount of time that children spend reading and positively impacted their reading scores. And a majority of students chose to read books that did reflect their lives. I love that. Now I want to talk about two documents that that our work really is based on, two ethics of librarianship. And the reason I'm pointing out the Library Bill of Rights and the Code of Ethics, one thing is that these did not pop up last year. Many of us are hearing people say, oh, the liberal librarians, or oh, this big movement to include diverse books. But the Library Bill of Rights that noted that we should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historic issues was written in adopted in 1939. So that's one document you could include in an onboarding packet. And then the second one I wanted to note is the Code of Ethics, also adopted in 1939. As with any constitution, documents get amended throughout time. And within the last 5 years, the American Library Association added this 9th Code of Ethics that talks about advancing racial and social justice in our libraries, communities, and profession. So while we are making sure we provide access to all content representing that range of point of view for every person in our community, we are also making sure that we are upholding this ethic of welcome for absolutely every patron in our library. And our libraries our public libraries are the only limited public forum. In other words, we are the institution that our government has set aside for one purpose, and that's providing access to information. When we make our policies, when our board adopts our policies, they must follow local, state, and federal rules, and they must also protect First Amendment rights. So when people say, well, you could do this, you can just pull that, it's like, no, we are required to provide access to information and do it on an equal basis. So as librarians, we're responsible for knowing how to purchase the materials, and we should be talking about that. We should be talking about the fact that we're professionally trained to provide access to materials, know what to buy for our community, know how to catalog it, and where to put it on the shelf. Our trustees need to be taught these values and need to learn the law because they are responsible for adopting these policies. And we should make sure that we're aware of the collection, development, and reconsideration policies, our meeting room and display policies, because if we open up this limited public forum and we make our meeting rooms accessible to the public, that forum, our meeting room becomes that forum. Our display case becomes that forum. Our social media becomes that forum if we open it up for comments. Now, people are like, does that mean I can't take down a comment that's horrible or crude or attacking staff? Does that mean that I have to allow people to say what they want during our library meeting? Then we need to remember we have patron behavior policies. Those apply anywhere within that forum as well. And with challenges to library materials, always remember that we're ensuring access to information. We're following those time, place, and manner rules. In other words, our policies, and those are upholding First Amendment rights. A few strategies I'm going to point out here. Again, we must follow the law. We need to provide proper review for materials as outlined in our reconsideration process and policies, and I'll note that in a moment. We should absolutely know where we can find support. If you are a school librarian, we'll be learning more from Teresa, but our students' First Amendment rights don't disappear when they walk in the classroom door. And we should have an understanding of, if we're in that school, who's supportive? Is the superintendent supportive? Am I union? Is my union rep supportive? Do I need to have an awareness of an attorney? When we get the challenge, we need to stick to the facts and set aside any viewpoint discrimination and be transparent about the process. And if you have this is just a sample of a reconsideration form, you'll note that it says, have you read, viewed, or listened to the entire work? That's an important piece of information. Also, have somebody fill out their name, their address. Is this person your patron? Does your policy say you'll accept materials challenge forms from people who aren't in your jurisdiction? In other words, do you only accept these from cardholders? If you're in a school, do you have to live within the school district? These are important considerations when you're developing your policies. And if you get a reconsideration form, stick to the facts. I've started saying that I'm sharing a review document instead of a support document. That's because I feel like members of the public, our patrons or our parents, may see support document and say, well, they've already decided they're going to keep the book. Whereas if you say, this is our review process, this is our review document, that language may help. How is this book cataloged? Where else can we get it from? What's the demand for the title? Sorry, I'm having a little problem advancing. There we go. Now, I abbreviated this just for the sake of seeing what you might want to include, but you would want to include any awards, and then you'll want to include reviews that you used when determining to buy the book. So I'm going to move to another scenario, and you can think about this whether you're a public librarian or a school librarian. Somebody in your building has read the book and returned it with a bunch of sticky notes noting objectionable passages, and they're asking you to remove the book. And I'm interested in knowing how you would handle this, or what you do if a trustee went to the library director and said, remove the book. You can think through what your process would be, what your thoughts would be. Feel free to enter them in the chat or unmute and talk about this for a couple minutes.
I don't think we'll take this.
No.
Okay, one person noted that these people should have to go through the same reconsideration procedures as anyone else. Absolutely. Whether it's a staff person, or whether it's a trustee, or whether it's a community member, you must follow the process. In fact, if a challenge ever gets to that court level, if the challenge process isn't followed, because those are our adopted legal rules, our policies and procedures, a judge would probably pitch it and say you didn't follow your own process. This is also another great opportunity for education about what we must do as library workers, about our values. And just so you know, these scenarios are not theoretical. They've actually taken place. One of my friends, this happened in her school. One of the teachers read a section and returned it chock full of sticky notes and said, you've got to pull this now. And she said, sorry, no, but here, look at this policy, and this is why. And it's not uncommon for our trustees, before they have some intellectual freedom training, to think this way.
Of course, we get another response. It came to me as a direct message rather than a general chat. And the response here is, we have a form that people can fill out, but I doubt our director would remove the book. I want to take this as an opportunity to ask you and the other panelists for a quick set of guidelines or suggestions, and see if other people on the session have faced that and had success talking to their directors on how to get past that kind of difficulty. Again, the comment is, we have a form that people can fill out, but I doubt our director would remove the book.
Shawn, do you want to share your thoughts as a public library director?
Well, yeah, this actually happened to me. This was the story I was going to tell. So I did have a trustee who brought me a pile of books and went through them. And our trustees are appointed by our mayor. And at that point, we didn't get any say about who our trustees were. And then she did end up challenging 2 books, one of which was obviously an adult book. It was a Batman comic book that was actually not written for teens. I mean, teens could read it. We would never stop teens from reading it, but it was pretty clear it was published for adults. So we ended up moving that one. And I always say, you know, sometimes we make mistakes in cataloging. We get thousands and thousands of books. We sometimes put them in the wrong place. But the other was the Everybody book, and she did challenge that one. And we went through the process, which is 2 librarians, the library board president and a library manager kind of oversees the process. And she did not want to remove the book. She wanted to move it to the parenting collection, which was, again, what we talked about earlier. And at first I thought to myself, I was like, well, that isn't such a big deal if it ends up getting moved. But after it went through the committee, and the committee, it was like, this was written for children. It was not written for parents to use with children. It belongs in the children's section. And once they said that, I was like, well, yeah, if it goes to the parenting collection, then it's not going to get used by the kids who want or need it, because it's intimidating for some kids to go pick out books from it. What is clearly a collection for adults. So she ended up appealing it to the library board. And that was a complicated process because she had to recuse herself and our board president had to recuse herself. We had to go through our city attorney to figure out exactly, you know, how this process was going to work. But it ended up our library board voted on the appeal, and they voted to not go by what she was saying, but to keep the book where it was. So, but I would never, you know, when she brought me the pile of books, you know, when you're a library director, you're a political animal too. So it wasn't like I was just going to slap her in the face with the books. It's like, get out of my office. You know, I have to be like, oh, okay, and look through it. But, you know, and I'm also juggling like what I'm going to say in the heat of that moment too, you know, trying to, you know, stick up for the library and intellectual freedom without like totally getting her all riled up. So, it ended up positively, but it was definitely a complicated process.
Josh, from what you said, I mean, the second part of that question from one of our participants here is, I doubt our director would remove the book. If a person feels like they've got a situation like that and they have doubts about whether the director would remove the book, what experience do you have in counseling staff members to talk to directors or in talking to directors yourself?
I would say that if the director removes the book, sometimes like I would not remove a book, but I also understand that it is very difficult for some directors in some communities, and everybody comes from a place. And so I would try to be forgiving of that director. You do not know what always is going on behind the scenes. You do not know, you know, these are our jobs at stake. And some people cannot stand on their principles and quit their job or get fired. They're stuck. And so I would try to be more forgiving, but I certainly would go talk to the director, you know, set up a meeting with them and say, this is, you know, I think this is wrong. But we don't always know what's going on either. I feel sorry for directors who didn't have the support that I had. Like I had support all the way up to my city manager, and it ended up even our mayor's support at the end of the day. And I had a council member who was really mad that the book did not get removed, who later called me and apologized for causing me trouble. So I'm really lucky. And I know that not all directors are in the same place, you know, and then we have to decide as employees, is this the place we want to work too? Like if this place does not match the values that we have, we may need to leave that place too. And that is probably hard for some people to hear, but it is a really difficult, complicated world out there for librarians right now.
Thanks, Shawn.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Shawn, for sharing that. And we were talking at the beginning too about the fact that just what Shawn said. You don't understand what the director's going through or what conversations may be taking place. The other thing you can do, find out if you have similar titles. Find out if people can still go to the collection, look up in the catalog and find what they need. And it's more important that people have access to those books than that particular title. In other words, if you have to remove a book, then you remove the book, but you always want to make sure there's materials in the collection that someone can have access to if that's the topic that they need.
And I do want to chime in. If my city council had decided to remove the book, if this person had been more politically savvy and gone over my head and went to our city council, I probably would not have had a choice. I would have had to remove it. Now, I don't think I would still be working for Ontario if that happened, because again, that doesn't match the values, my library values, but I probably would not have had a choice. You know, your city council at the end of the day is the boss of the city. They get to make those decisions. And whether we like that or not, that is often how things happen.
Absolutely. Right. Paul, should I go ahead and proceed? Okay. A little bit more of this, and then we'll be hearing more from Shawn. So some thoughts. What can you do? You can encourage every person you know, your mom, your sister, your brother-in-law, your kids, if they're 18. Encourage people to run for office, because right now our local library boards, our local school boards are the place where many of these decisions are taking place. I'm going to note a couple things here related to the organizations I work with and the work that they're doing and that you can reach out to for support. The Freedom to Read Foundation is closely affiliated with the American Library Association, and we do some similar education and advocacy work. The big difference is point number 2, their litigation. Because we're a separate nonprofit, we focus on the First Amendment and access to information, and we are able to litigate. We have joined and written many briefs in the last year and had some good success. Cases like House Bill 900 in Texas, where a couple weeks ago, a judge put that bill on hold and said you cannot just summarily remove content from kids' education, from schools. So I encourage you to look into the Freedom to Read Foundation, reach out to us if you have questions. And often when we're supporting librarians going through a challenge, if it looks like it's becoming a legal situation, we will talk with our general counsel and determine how to proceed. The American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom, we provide one-on-one confidential, let me repeat the word, confidential support. We would never say, oh, you work for Shawn? I talked with him last week and blah, 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 blah. Whether you are a library worker, a community member, a parent, if you're experiencing or seeing a challenge or censorship, if you want help, call us and we will assist you in navigating it. We also keep statistics of what's going on where throughout the country, what titles are being challenged, if we're seeing more hate crimes or more school-based situations. So please, please, please report censorship to the ALA Office for Intellectual Freedom. And public awareness campaigns. We're part of Banned Books Week Coalition, and so is the Freedom to Read Foundation. This is a coalition of many different organizations. And last year, they heard from a number of librarians that even talking about banned books was too edgy in their community. So they came up with this year's theme of Let Freedom Read. which many more people were able to embrace, create displays off of it, and that kind of thing. So feel free to reach out to ALA. And then I want to highlight, a few of us have brought up what happens when you're in a position and you're either, so you may be facing discrimination in the workplace, you may be facing a situation where your job is threatened because of your defense of intellectual freedom. If you need to, please look up the Merit Fund. You can apply for a grant to retain an attorney or cover housing or cover insurance for a month. And if you need to reapply for further funding, you can. I encourage you to be aware of this fund. It's separate from FTRF and separate from ALA. But be aware of it and share it with librarians and library workers who need it. And then I want to talk for a moment about Unite Against Book Bans. So ALA staff realized, this has been around for about 1.5 years now. We realized that library workers cannot always shoulder these challenges. We can't be the ones to speak out sometimes. What we can do is have community members support us. They can show up. They can attend our school board meetings. They can attend our library board meetings. And so we created Unite Against Book Bans as a campaign that exists for community advocacy building. This is a wonderfully nonpartisan initiative. The statistics are nonpartisan. The talking points are very common sense, straightforward. And I encourage people to think about their community leaders, their faith leaders, their family members. Who are people who you envision being able to speak up on behalf of libraries and librarians? Unite Against Book Bans has a challenge toolkit. If you as a librarian reach out and say, you know what, we could use help in this area, I can't speak out. If community members have given their zip code and they're on Unite Against Book Bans, we can send an email to community members in that area saying this is how you can help. We've got up to 200 national partner organizations now, and I love the diversity of those organizations. All right, I'm going to stop screen sharing and hand it over to Shawn now to tell us a bit more about his experience, and we'll have a few more opportunities to talk throughout. But thank you for walking through a few minutes of slides with me. I appreciate it. And we'll definitely have facilitated time to ask any questions about the material.
So one of the things that we decided we would do when we knew that this library board member was potentially going to keep bringing us challenges, we didn't know where this was actually going to land. And we knew the environment out in the country at that point was some libraries were getting, 100 books banned, challenges at a time. So one of the things I had my staff do, and it is complicated, but I have them get ready for this. Like, we went through our catalog and we looked up any books in the teen or children's collection that had a subject of, related to LGBTQ or trans, and prepared ourselves, got ready with reviews, and so that if it happened to us, we would already have that. We wouldn't be caught off guard on books that we were thought that might get challenged. So that was one of the things we did. We were proactive in that way. It ended up that we did not remove the book, but people did show up to for several months, both pro book banning and anti book banning. Always more people that were against book bans than for, but at a particular meeting, one of the anti-book banners became very upset, and my boss was at that meeting, and she went out and tried to talk to them, and he said he was going to come and fill the next library board meeting, you know. And so that really freaked us out because we knew that was happening. Certainly at our local school boards were filled with parents who were mad about things at the library, and so we're like, okay, we need to get ready. And you know, you have to kind of walk a political line too, whether we like that or not. And so, you know, I just surreptitiously, you know, I told my staff, I said, you know, start letting people know that they need to be at the next library board meeting. And so one of the things you can do, if you know this is going to happen, is what we were able to do is our Teamsters, the union that is the library's union, has an LGBTQ wing of the Teamsters. And so they found out about it and they showed up at full force at the next meeting. We had more people at our library board meeting than ever before. And all of them were pro, you know, for the library. They were totally against banning books. So that was something that, and then we had others in our community who were, you showed up as well. So that was a pleasant surprise and very heartwarming. Since that time, I found out that the same man, and he did not fill the room, by the way, nobody showed up. So I since found out that one of our children's librarians went to do a PTA meeting at a local school, and that same patron was there, and he got up and started to really, you know, not yell at her, but, you know, troll her basically about things in the library. And all the other parents in the room told him to sit down. Like they were like, you're not going to tell our kids what they can read, stop. And that was really heartening for me. This is, to me, sometimes a very loud minority. And as people have started to find out, they've gotten really mad. Like, don't tell me what my kids can read. And so that was nice to hear. The other thing that we've done is we really took a look at our process because it really did not work. This was the first challenge that I've been there 12 years. We had never had a challenge in the time I was here. So the process just was very, for one thing, we didn't give the process long enough. Every body book is pretty short. That was the book that was challenged. But what if it had been the Bible? I mean, people are challenging really big books. Our librarians could not have gotten a book read in the time that we gave them. So we are redoing our reconsideration policy. We're adding extra time depending on the length of the book. If we get multiple challenges at once, we have in there that we will take them one at a time so that we're not having several committees because we don't have enough people for starters. And so that we would take them in the order that we receive them, and only Ontario residents. Like I don't want people coming from outside and, you know, causing us trouble or making us work for people. We work for the city of Ontario. If an Ontario resident wants to challenge a book, I don't like it, but that's their prerogative. But I don't work for anybody else. I work for the city of Ontario. And if somebody from outside challenges, we can't tell them no at this point. So all of that does have to go to our library board. Again, I'm very blessed. I have a brand new library board. The person that caused me trouble is gone. The person that voted for her is also gone in her favor. And of my 5 library board, 4 are new. And the library board president currently was always on the side of the library. So, and my 4 who are new were all vetted beforehand. This was a new process put in place, I think likely because of what had happened. And they are all very progressive. I'll put it like that. In a conservative city, we've ended up with a very progressive library board, which is heartening for me. It's been wonderful working with them. But we have to take this policy before our board, and I have no doubt that they will okay it. So those are some of the things that I have learned in the process. It's been very interesting, and I'm hoping it doesn't happen again. One is enough in my career.
Shawn, I have a question related to your policies and how you responded. And then we also received a question that you may have some insight on. One question I have about your policies, do you recommend having an end to the process? In other words, do you say this decision will be final and we will retain it for X months, or we will remove it for X months?
We did add that language, and it's so new that I don't remember the time period, but we will not look at that item again for a certain amount of time. And it's not like 6 months, it's like several years. So yes, 100%, because you don't want the same, you don't want it challenged again and again and again.
Yeah, and in a school district, you may want to have that for the amount of time that a student would be there, or for several years, because you don't want the parent to bring that back again and again. One question that came up while you were speaking, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, and I don't know if I've got a reflection or not, and I'll have to think of my own experience and what I've done. The question is, if we show up at school board or city council meetings to support the freedom to read, do we have to mention that we're speaking as a citizen or resident as opposed to being a librarian or employee? I'm interested in your perspective, and then I can weigh in.
I was pretty specific with my, when we met about this, I was like, even if you live in the city, we need to find other people to go speak for us, because we are biased in this. Like, if we go speak for ourselves, it is more weight when people who do not work at the library go speak for us. So that is why we really, got the word out and said, we really need you. So I don't think it helps our cause when we go speak for ourselves, because we have a dog in this fight, and that can be looked on as, oh, well, they, of course they think that. And your council or your, city council, you probably don't, a lot of us don't even live in the city in which we work. So again, if it was my own city where I live, I do not live in Ontario, I live in another city, yeah, I will be there. But I don't live, it's not my community at the end of the day. So finding community members is I think the wisest thing to do. Does that answer the question?
I think that's a really good perspective. And to add to that, if I go to my local school board meeting in the district where my sons attend, and if I talk about the topic, because we do have people from a particular group showing up asking to censor materials at the high school level, I usually just say, I am a parent in the district, my sons attend such and such school, this is my perspective and my request. And I'm more likely to share a reflection like the one I shared with you about their varying needs, because right now I feel that will go further than, like you said, if I just say, hey, I'm a librarian, I work for the Office of Intellectual Freedom, they will think, of course you feel that way. Whereas if they understand that my connection is as a parent with children with varying needs, we need to retain these materials, it goes further. And yes, I think I would reach out to find and identify some allies to speak if I can. That would be preferable.
Joyce, can I ask you a question?
So, of course.
We're not quite sure what to call we currently call it a request for material review. We're not going to call it material review. I know a lot are called requests for reconsideration, but right now I have it called statement of concern. Do you have a opinion on what these policies should be called?
I think I prefer reconsideration over the word concern, because then people won't think, oh, I should be concerned.
Okay.
Whereas when I think reconsideration, I think, yeah, they're realizing the librarian will look at it. They may move it, they may not. They're going to think about it. And that's where I've changed from saying support document to review document, because it's implying I will review it, I will consider it. I feel like that's a more open statement and a more neutral statement.
Okay, thanks. That was kind of my experience. If anyone wants to ask me questions, that's great. And that might, you know, I might remember more, but that, it definitely was not a fun time. I will say that. I will say too, as a gay man, I did go to my, you know, my supervisor, and because all of the books in the pile and the book, other than the Batman book, everybody book, the reason it was being challenged was because it was an LGBTQ friendly sex education book. And, you know, my library board that, you know, voted to keep the book caught onto that right away, even though that library board member did not necessarily call that out, that they caught on right away that that's what was going on. But I did go, our library board are paid by the city. They're paid a nominal fee amount. And I did go and say, you know, as a gay man, if this continues, I feel like I'm working in a hostile work environment. Like, this is really aimed at me, and it's very disturbing to me. So I do believe there were talks about liability and so, but I was like, I can't work in a place where this is going to happen. So if you want to keep me, then something needs to be done. So
I'm really glad that you brought that up for a couple of reasons. Teresa will certainly address this thoroughly in our next session, but I want to talk for a moment about the concept of viewpoint discrimination and also about trustees and the code of ethics they should uphold. If you look up the trustee code of ethics at the United for Libraries website. So United for Libraries is the American Library Association's trustee entity. And there is a trustee code of ethics. Each year on my community's library board, we must each sign that code of ethics. And when we talk about the law, we talk about the fact that viewpoint discrimination is not legal. So if you are considering materials, and if your board says, we don't want any content related to race, or we don't want any content in the library with LGBTQ content, that is pure viewpoint discrimination. In other words, the trustees are not setting aside their personal conviction. They are not upholding that requirement to provide access to all forms of materials representing all topics with a balanced, viewpoint. In other words, both sides of all topics. And that's a tough one for any of us, because as Shawn said, we are political beings, we are human beings, and the trustees in that instance were giving in to viewpoint discrimination. So I wanted to bring up that topic, and I encourage you to take a look at the trustee code of ethics that Paul has shared. That's an important factor, that they can't just summarily decide what they want in the library. They have to uphold that First Amendment commitment as well.
Veronica had a question, and maybe Veronica, can you voice your question a little bit and explain it a little bit? Maybe she's not here anymore. It has something to do with obscenity, but I can't go to I'm afraid if I go to the link, I'm going to lose you all. Well, I can speak to, if somebody comes in and says we have pornography, obscenity has a legal definition. And so we just kind of fall back on that. And there's a that if somebody says something's obscene, we don't collect obscene things in the library. That would be illegal. So there's a legal definition, and there's nothing in the library that's obscene.
Yeah, I'm noting in the text that, right now we're hearing a lot of phrases being thrown around in public and school libraries. This is harmful to minors. This is obscene. As Shawn just noted, pornography, harmful to minors, and obscenity are all legal definitions. A judge would determine if a book falls into that. And I always tell parents and patrons, our public library staff are not buying materials that meet any of those legal definitions. We do not have materials that are harmful to minors in our children's or YA sections. So yeah, basically what Shawn said. Sorry, I'm just duplicating there.
I think to go back to the page too, something that we did when this started as well, that scenario about the page, is we got ahead because it isn't going to be, it isn't going to be me who gets the challenge right off the bat. I don't work the desk, I don't shelf books. It's going to be a page or a clerk. And so everyone throughout the library needs to understand how important this is. And everybody needs to have scripts, because not everybody can speak off the cuff and speak eloquently about intellectual freedom, especially if they're like a high school student. So having scripts, having them in advance and going over them in meetings and making sure people understand it is really, really helpful. And letting staff at the, the bottom rung, your pages and your part-time staff, that they don't have to have the answers for this either. Like they can refer it up the chain, that they don't need to know all the answers, that we don't expect them to be able to defend intellectual freedom as they're shelving books. They should go get a supervisor or somebody who's full-time to assist them with that.
Joyce, I want to jump in here, harkening back to the years when I was running a staff orientation program for San Francisco Public Library. And the issues we're talking about today really weren't on the table at that point very much, at least not overtly here in San Francisco. Very different setting here. And I would suggest taking my experience then, putting it in contemporary times. Every one of you should be thinking about what you're telling your incoming staff. Shawn just gave you the perfect guidance. Make sure people understand you're not there to have to explain things that you're not well versed in. Understand that if somebody hits you with something that you're not comfortable with, that you move that up to an appropriate level, your immediate supervisor, somebody who's on a reference desk, or anything in that. But it comes from anticipating this and putting it into training from day one for your staff so they know where they stand. Everybody wins in a situation like that. Thanks, Shawn, for being so explicit about it.
I see that we have another question here too, sort of related to the last question regarding obscenity. This person asked if there's a good standard response for when librarians are accused of being groomers. From a former press person perspective, I never repeat the word back. In fact, I wouldn't directly address that. If they're in front of you, which is pretty rare, they're usually going to be doing this on social media because they don't want to even say that word in public. So if it's on social media, I ignore it. If they're in front of me doing this, I can invite them to look at our collection development policy. I can invite them to speak to the director. But I never respond directly to something like that, and certainly not in defense. And Paul, is this an okay time for me to ask the attendees one of the questions that we'd noted related to this?
Almost there, but Elizabeth's got her hand up. You want to take her question, then absolutely go into that.
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, Elizabeth.
Well, kind of in relation to training staff is in our incident happening here. see if I get my hand down. In our situation here, you know, I find that the extremist groups who are causing issues have ways of presenting it that make it seem more acceptable than it is. So some of our staff aren't aware of the like national hate group behind the stuff going on. And so I've had to kind of sit down with staff and say, yeah, you know, there are arguments for, you know, first right amendment, and we can debate that, but here's the context. So I didn't know, you know, so I really think I just wanted to emphasize that the point of talking to staff and having this awareness and increased understanding is really important, I think, right now.
Of course, I'm going to totally agree. You understand, I've been in training for 20 or 30 years now in libraries and other organizations. So I always think it starts from seeing where our problem areas are, identifying what our goals are. What do people have to know to respond adequately? Designing an engaging training that takes them through that, making sure they understand that this is supported institution-wide, and understand what their next steps are if they're totally flummoxed by a situation like that. So couldn't agree with you more than to say it's a continual thing of making it a supportive endeavor to bring people along and give them the tools they need to do what they need to do.
I also think there's like, we need to just let our staff know there's no point in arguing with these people. Like, do not debate this. Like, it is not your job to debate it at the reference desk. Like, just keep going back to our policies. And here, if you have a problem with one of our books, we have a request for consideration, and just keep going back with that. Like, we're not going to win that argument. These people are so convinced of this at this point that I'm not sure what can unconvince them except time. We're just going to have to play a really long game. And I think eventually this will all go away, but it's going to be a while.
You know, in the panel that we did live for the California Library Association version of this in June of 2023, Derek Wolfgram from Redwood City offered us a spectacular example of how you do this. As Shawn says, you don't argue it. But what Derek pointed out was when some Proud Boy members tried with guns in hands to disrupt I think it was drag queen story time in Redwood City, Derek actually went out into the parking lot and talked with them for 90 minutes. He did a lot of listening. He wasn't there to try to argue with them. He offered them the courtesy of listening and explaining the library policies. It's not that any minds were changed, but at least it took it down a lot. And as we look at conflict resolution, it's one of the great things we learned from people like Derek and other people that were around. So Joyce, you were going to go on with some questions if we've pretty much gone through that one.
I think we've pretty much gone through that one. I didn't know if it's time to hear from Elizabeth about what's going on throughout the state, or if you had information to ask folks before then.
I'm quite happy to see Beth come in, and then we'll circle back to unanswered questions.
Sounds good.
Well, I think, excuse me, I've been a little bit under the weather this whole week, so my voice keeps going in and out, so I apologize. One of the main things that I'm hearing is that dependent upon where a library is situated, there is either a lot of staff that are in I'm going to call it distress, mainly because it's unknown territory. You don't know when you might get a challenge, or you might have, you know, Moms for Liberty show up on your doorstep, or something that's more politically based than just the regular patron coming in that's concerned about their child and what they're reading. So most of the students that I have in the San Jose program are spread out all over the country. And not only do I hear the same thing from California, I hear it from all parts of the country. And that is that part of the training that they would like to see from their libraries includes some mental health training, whether it's on how to de-stress or you know, how to take care of yourself. And it's one thing to say, which my personality is, I'll happily go back to telling you all about our documents, and here's a reconsideration form, and etc. But there's a lot of people that are very mentally tired that are in our profession right now. And so I think it's inherent upon upon libraries in general to look at their training programs and see how they can draw out staff that may be having issues rather than waiting for the staff member to come to a supervisor or whatever. And so just from my perspective, and this was the same at the conference when we presented this same topic, is a lot of people responded to that yes, you know, they feel much better at work if they feel like they're heard, if they can express their stress or express their I'm not going to say fears, but just the fact that it's not what they signed on for in a lot of these cases, especially when there's like Proud Boys that are, you know, armed at the, you know, armed and standing in your library because it's an open carry state. So I just, you know, if any of you have examples of good staff training, I'd love to hear about it. We are urging all of our library districts to have some form of training that is specific to these topics, not just going over the collection policy, but also giving you some other tricks of the trade as it appears to. One of the best things that I've heard said was just not use the same, Joyce said this, is just not to get involved in using the same words that they're using with you because they want that reaction. They want to get you upset. And so by calling you a groomer and having you enter into a conversation about groomers, right there is going to raise your blood pressure off the Richter scale. So there's a lot of great techniques. I think just more people are asking that their library looks into more training for, and I'm talking about frontline staff all the way down to the page level.
Okay, I'm realizing that we had a hand up. Kristen, did you have a question? I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had your hand up. Feel free to type or unmute if you have an outstanding question. Okay, if we did miss one, please, everyone, please feel free to type comments and questions into the chat or to speak up. But related to what Beth just said, and we've been discussing for a few minutes, I'm wanting to put the question out there to all of you. What are some ways that you de-escalate, whether it's receiving challenges, being in the midst of a First Amendment audit, or other situation? What de-escalation tools have you used or do you recommend? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And feel free to type or unmute, either one.
I'll say by the time you know, this could be anything, but by the time it comes to the director, there's been some calming down usually if somebody's really, really upset. I just try to listen, and I never ever agree to anything, but I just try to have an open, you know, an open mind to listen. Even when she brought the pile of books that I clearly was like, this is gonna end badly. You know, I was just very, you know, and she had some things she wanted to do that I was not going to do, but one was like put rainbow stickers on all the books that had LGBTQ themes. And I said, I don't think I can do that, but I definitely will go back. You know, I'll throw you a bone. I'll definitely go back and do some research on that. She goes, well, we could be the first to do it. And I said, well, we'll see. So I always try to just remain calm and kind of, you know, again, not argue. And that has worked for me. A lot of smiling and nodding. Oh, yeah.
And of course, we're all smiling and nodding with you because we know if you mirror the anger and the angst that's coming your way, it just puts fuel on the fire.
Yeah.
Every great conflict resolution person I know in library land and beyond talks about the idea of no matter how personal and offensive it sounds, you have to let it go over your head. You develop that very important and difficult to develop skill, letting it go over your head, taking a deep breath. And as Shawn said, don't say anything you're going to regret later. Get support from your community, from your supervisors, from your colleagues, and tackle it at a level that takes it down rather than increases it. That's the beauty of the Derek Wolfgram example.
I just wanted, if I could for a second, first I want to thank Beth because I think what she mentioned about the fatigue of staff is very real and it is important to address. And I appreciate her saying that. We all just came off of COVID and it was like off of COVID and then straight into all of these kind of things. And one of the things that happens in our community a lot is people won't straight out, but the members of the community, not all members, but some members of the community will walk in and just kind of say things to staff like under their breath, like not even say out loud, like, oh, they'll say things under their breath or just in the earshot of your frontline workers or just kind of that. So frontline workers are kind of taking that on daily of,
Yeah,
this person said this one said this, and they're not even really being confrontational as much as they're just like walking by saying, ugly comments or things like that. So that is a very real concern. But I think in our library, one of the things that we've done and I think is helpful is the staff itself has really kind of formed a nice I don't know, like a kind of a band of brothers almost kind of thing, like where we're very engaging with each other and very opening to hear each other's experiences and then laugh about it or do whatever. And so we're really working on our morale as far as that goes. And I think that goes a long way of building a morale within your library community itself with your workers of like how, oh, this is the crazy thing that happened today. And, just to even just have a voice to that. And we have a very supportive manager right now, which is very helpful as well, where like in that morning huddles or whatever we do, and we kind of do things in our staff break room that kind of break up that feeling of constantly being, these little comments that come from like we're a united front on our back end, even if we can't say something back to patrons or whatever about how we're feeling or whatever. It's a united front on our backs, on our back end. So that's important, I think.
The research I've really been calling a lot of attention to over the last few months, did it at the CLA conference, and I think on our last two sessions, Jeffrey Cohen's recent book called Belonging. It's a deep dive into what makes people feel like they're parts of communities. But building on what Jolene said, part of what makes belonging work is actually having somebody that you disagree with realize that you will listen to them, not necessarily agree, but that there is that listening capability in place. Highly recommend that if you've got the time to go through it, because it gives you a lot of insight into why we sometimes feel like we're part of a group, sometimes we don't, and helps us to develop the empathy for people we might violently disagree with. But we owe it to ourselves and to our communities to at least listen as long as the conversation remains reasonable.
Paul, what was that called again?
The book is called Belonging. I've got it on my shelf right here. Let me see if I can't pull it fast enough. I'll look it up online, but I'll be right back. I've got it. Belonging is a formal title. The subtitle, I hope this doesn't scare you off, The Science of Creating Connection and Bridging Divides. Cohen is the author, C-O-H-E-N. First name Jeffrey is spelled G-E-O-F-F-R-E-Y. Wonderful book.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul.
Sure.
Beth shared the note also that staff support groups can give ideas to those that don't know what to do when faced with an outward challenge. So I love that idea of staff being the band of brothers and supporting one another.
Hey, Joyce, let's go. We do have a few extra minutes. Beth, was there anything else you wanted to add before we move on?
Well, I just really liked what Jolene was saying, because one of the one of the recurrent themes is that feeling like you're part of a team and not by yourself. And even if you're on different shifts from one another, but there's just a team feeling, and it has nothing to do with, being able to go to your supervisor or being able to go to your director. It's more of when I'm on shift, I'm not alone. And it might be just me and one other person on an evening shift, but I do know that we've got the training we need. We've got some de-escalation techniques, but we also know, and this is the one that I had a great mentor in my first public library job coming from schools, was when he told me, it's not personal against you. You cannot say that you're just the first person they ran into. You're the one that's behind the desk and you get it. So just put that face on of librarian and don't take it personally, and you'll do better, because you've got the documentation, you've got some training, and you've got your fellow workers that got your back. So I just think that a lot of people are feeling really alone, that they are afraid of a confrontation and not knowing how to handle it. And especially if it's a bomb threat, like if we were in Davis, they've had 3 bomb threats. Well, I can't imagine that a bomb threat doesn't unsettle you when it's recurring. I have a school librarian that said they received 17 bomb threats in 1 week in her high school. And it was all the fact that they wanted 4 books removed from the collection, and that was not happening. And so they were escalating to the disturbance. But they had a network, and that's what I'm talking about, is they had each other to talk about how to get through that irritating thing of being, just bombarded, literally with bomb threats. So I'm advocating, just from the conversation, is to look for that staff member that might be isolated and just make sure that they know that you're there, that you're a voice that they can talk to, and that you're all on the same page about how you'd like to handle something if it walks through the door. It sounds simple, but it's not that simple, because people are on different shifts and have different schedules, and you might miss somebody that really does need a little bit of attention for their mental health. So that's my big message today, is if you see someone that on a staff that you work with, you be the person that reaches out. I think that's my message, is we're all in this together as librarians, and we've got great tools. We just need to know how to use them.
Thanks, Beth. That really takes us to the heart of something that we were talking about before the formal session started today. I want to bring it in now for a few minutes. Panelists, we were discussing the idea of, with all the challenges out there, feeling like this is a time of great pessimism and we don't even know how to dig ourselves out of the hole. And yet we're all still somehow keeping the sense of optimism to move forward in positive ways. What would you suggest to people? And let's turn to some of the people that are on the session for their best ways in terms of keeping a sense of perspective that the world is not coming crashing down upon our heads, no matter how bad this may feel in the moment. Start with Joyce. How do you keep that sense of optimism, Joyce?
I do keep that sense of optimism because I understand that it's so stressful when we deal with this in our school, in our public library. But on a greater level, if challenges reach the court, judges truly do support the First Amendment and rely on that. And therefore, when I see that, I can look at our basic policies and our basic ethics in the workplace and take it to the most micro level of, I'm here to provide access to information for every person in my community and provide them with the materials they want and need to have their best life. And I remind myself of the amazing things offered at our public and school libraries, the story times, the fun programming, the ability to check out a ukulele, whatever it might be for you in your public library. remind yourself of all those amazing things and have that at the forefront when you walk into your workplace.
And to take it one step further, we allow others to set the narrative for us. So the narrative tends to be set in the media and in public forums that look at all these challenges. And you just said it, Joyce. For each one of those challenges, how many story times go uninterrupted each week? How many materials within libraries go used without anybody complaining about them? And if we're going to be advocates on this, we have to do our part to get those stories out. When we're in public settings, say, hey, the other day, we just saw 20 people come in and use all these books and they were happy. They used all these videos, they were happy. This was the impact we had in our community for that one person who came in and tried to disrupt something or somebody that challenged it. Shawn, your best efforts at trying to keep your optimism up in tough times.
Well, I mean, for myself personally, a lot of self-care. So like, really going deep into hobbies, and taking time off. And then for the library as a whole, when we came out of the pandemic closures, with it was not an easy time, as everyone at the same time. But we did a series of so if you're in a position of authority to be able to do this, we did 6 half-day staff days. And so we closed the library for half a day, 6 days last year. And everybody from Paige all the way up to myself worked with a consultant and came up with a new mission, vision, and values together so that we all came out of it more enthusiastic about what we do. And it was very positive because it was all about, these are all the really cool things that we do, and these are the cool things that we want to do. Not only that we're doing, but what we're going to do in the future. So even one day, if you can't do 6, like that, I think is very helpful to kind of ground everybody and remind everybody why we're here.
Yeah, circling back to what you were saying, anything you want to add there?
No, I just think that as Shawn hit it on the head, it's self-care. It's like, if you're not taking care of yourself, then you can't take care of your professional self when you're at work. And a lot of people that get isolated or their job is weighing heavily on them, may not do the self-care or be in a situation to, they have 4 children at home. So self-care is a whole different perspective for them. But I do think that there's a way that you can reach out and find different things that give you some joy. But the other thing is that for every single time you have a person come up and want you to remove, 4 books, they don't know the titles, whatever, you'll have 100 kids leave your library that day smiling because they found the books that they wanted, or they went to the story time and they had a wonderful time. So I'm just saying is look out for your mental health, look for help, and also look for the people that you work with to be a support system. I don't think that you are alone even when you feel that you're alone. I think it's just some people, their lives are so busy they don't quite notice when someone's struggling. So, it's not easy. I mean, librarians now, between when I started and now, I never had to worry about doing a Narcan shot. I did have to deal with the homeless, and I did have to deal with, a lot of other issues. But it is a whole different world now that librarians are working in. And I think that we have to look at taking care of ourselves. And my big message today is mental health is a big part of the discussion that we need to have, because there's always bad news. It's bad, bad, bad. And we don't hear a lot of good news.
Joyce, you want to do a last round of final Q&A and solicit comments from anybody else that's been dealing with how they keep their optimism up?
Were you asking participants or panelists?
I'm asking you if you want to do that wrap-up Q&A, and then I'll come in with the question that we're going to pose to the participants to do the final wrap-up.
Okay, I want to address one question I see on that a participant posed, which is there an organization that can provide a staff training? Look to Beth and CLA, look to ALA, send me an email. I'll type my email address in there, and we'll find someone to speak with you about the topics that you need to have covered, because we want to have staff reached. Okay, Paul, my apologies one more time. You're asking for a wrap-up thought? Or did you have a question I missed?
I was going to toss it back to you, having stolen the mic from you, but let me just ask the obvious question here. Anybody out there, what have we not answered that you wanted to ask today? Checking for pulses here. Everybody's just stunned into silence. I have to speak.
Type, talk.
Okay, all of you that are sitting there in silence, you know we're just playing with you right now. We're giving you that silence and making you so uncomfortable. Go, okay, I'll ask a question. What didn't you hear that you wanted to hear? Otherwise, I guess they heard it all. Final question we always ask in these sessions to make sure that you walk away with something usable. What's one thing you will do differently? This is for all of you who are participants rather than the panelists. We already know what they're going to do. Those of you that just sat here with us for almost 90 minutes, what will you do differently in the next week as a result of having been part of this conversation? Again, feel free to unmute yourself. Always nice to hear other voices here.
Well, I know I'm a panelist and not supposed to answer, but I'm going to go back and rename my statement of concern request for reconsideration. Like, I learned something today, so I was very, very pleased and happy to be able to get that answer. Thank you, Joyce.
I appreciate that Shawn shared his story again, because talk about practical application of what to do when you're faced with this. One person said they're going to encourage family and friends to support their local libraries. One thing that I'm going to do is encourage people to share the trustee code of ethics with their public library or school library trustees. And it looked like we had someone else unmuting.
I supervise 11 staff members through my page in LA frontline staff. So I think I'm going to, at our next all staff meetings, discuss scripts of things that we can do, and then ways that we can be supportive, and offer again some of the services that we have, mental health services through our city that are available to all staff, just as a reminder that there's help in the library here, and there's also help if they don't feel comfortable coming to us. We have lots of great resources, so I'm going to make sure that resource sheet is available for them.
I wanted to throw something else out too, is that when you do your orientation with your new employees, I'm not sure even we at my library talk about intellectual freedom. We talk about confidentiality and make them sign off on that, but I think it's really important to start right on that first day.
I think that's great too. I'm going to go back and I do have an orientation packet for them when they first come in. So I think I'm going to go in and add a sheet about that as well. So I appreciate that very much.
We got a comment from Jeannie. I want to make sure. Oops, it jumped on me. See if I can get myself back into that comment to read it. I want to make sure my librarians know they are not alone, and that they don't let challenges or the threat of challenges pull their focus from all the, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with chat, from all the positive things happening in our school libraries. So thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Shawn, and all of you who were here with us today. Remember, we try to do these on the second Wednesday of each month. They generally start at 10 a.m. Pacific time. If there are topics you want to see us covered, please reach out to me, Paul at paulsignorelli.com. Reach out to Beth. Let us know what we can do to make these sessions really work for you and make a difference for you. Also, remember that they're all archived. So again, you can go and use these at any point, and encourage your friends to come. We have 100 free seats every month. So come, bring friends, encourage people. Primary audience under the terms of the bequest of this is California library staff and anybody in the library community, but you don't have to be in California to be able to see these or to join us. So keep coming back. We look forward to being there. Those of you that want to stay beyond the recording, we'll stay at least a few more minutes once we stop the recording for a post-session chat and a quick debrief with the panelists. So again, thank you very much. And I think at this point we can say good day, and Karen, you can cut the recording.